Hello everyone. So we will talk about lymphatic system. Okay, so we'll talk about lymphatic system, lymphatic organs and tissues. So what is lymphatic system? This is a system that returns fluids that is leaked from the blood vessels, like suppose from the capillaries, and then it enters back into the blood vessel system again, which is into the veins actually. So it's a fluid that is leaked out from the blood. It has three components in it, three parts. The network of lymphatic vessels, okay, or the lymphatics actually, all the vessels. The fluid itself with that passes through this, and then the lymph nodes that's present in them. So three parts. And then there are a couple of associated lymphoid organs and tissues like spleen, thymus, tonsil, and others, right? So we'll first talk about the functions of lymphatic vessels, their structure, distribution, lymph nodes, the mechanism of lymph transport, and then finally about lymph tissues. So the lymphatic system, this returns the interstitial fluid. This is basically leaked fluid that comes out of the blood, that leaks and also has plasma proteins, and it is leaked from the capillary part of blood vessels, and then it has its own network, and then it empties into the venous system, and then into the venous system again. So the lymphatic vessels is nothing but an elaborate network of these drainage vessels, and approximately it circulates around 3 liters of this fluid, of interstitial fluid. And then once the interstitial fluid actually uh, enters the lymphatics, then it is called as the lymph itself. Okay, so lymphatic vessels is the entire network actually, is the entire network, and then it carries the fluid called lymph, and then it is also carried throughout the vessel system itself. And if you are confused about what exactly interstitial fluids are, that is the fluid between the blood vessels and the cell itself. So basically whatever is coming out of the cells, that is the interstitial fluid. All right, so next is how is basically the lymphatic vessels work. So like blood vessels, lymphatic vessel also has lymphatic capillaries, are the smallest part of these vessels, and then there are the bigger ones, right? So lymphatic vessels altogether is always a one-way system and ensures that lymph flow only towards heart. So if you see here, the lymph flow leaves the capillaries, goes through the system, and it opens into the heart. There is no backflow from the heart again. Okay, so lymph vessels or lymphatics included lymphatic capillaries, like I said, which are the smallest part of this system, and then the largest vessels. So these capillaries are blind-ended vessels. So like here, it's blind-ended. And they weave between, they are like located between the tissue cells itself and then the blood capillaries. Well, we don't see them in bones, teeth, and bone marrows, and very few also in the central nervous system. So few that previously we thought that there are no such thing of lymphatic capillaries in central nervous system, but there are, but it's just few. But similar to blood capillaries, lymphatic capillaries are also more permeable, and they also have mini valves just to prevent backflow actually. And they can take up larger molecules and particles that the blood capillaries cannot. Sometimes they can. For example, protein, debris, pathogens, and the most dangerous part is cancer cells, because this cancer cells once is in the lymphatic system, like you can see, they can take up these cancer cells, but it's also a easy route for things like cancer cells and pathogens to travel throughout the body, and it's very dangerous if these things actually get into the lymphatics, or it's into the basically then it will be part of our circulation system, and easily it will be spread around. And then there are lacteals. What are lacteals? These are specialized lymph capillaries that's only present in the intestine mucosa. What about the larger vessels? So lymph capillaries drain into the larger vessels, all right, and they drain into the collecting vessels, all right. Consist and the What are these collecting vessels? Is a combination of several vessels, trunks, and ducts together. They have tunics similar to veins, but obviously it's thinner, much more thinner, and they have valves inside as well. Anastomos are also seen like frequently, which are the shunts. And collecting vessels in skin travel, they travel along with the superficial. Well, we will see that in a second how it happens. And then finally, it actually opens up together, and lymphatic trunks which are formed by the union of the largest collecting vessels actually. So the smallest vessels, okay, the smallest vessels combine and forms trunk, and then the trunk actually finally opens into the duct. So if I have to, the nomenclature is like this. So basically the small capillaries drain into vessels, okay, the capillaries drain into vessels, the vessels collectively drain into the trunks, and that all of that drains into the finally into the duct, which is the biggest vessel of the lymphatics. And these trunks can be named by the body region, for example lumbar, subclavian, jugular, intestinal, all of that. So like in the duct is what now lymph is delivered from the trunks, like I said, and then finally into the ducts. Two ducts we have. One is the right lymphatic duct, which is on the right side. It's on basically drains in the upper right arm and right side of head and thorax over here. And the thoracic duct is on the left side, which starts out as the sac-like structure called cisterna chili, and then goes forward, and then it joins in and then empties into the left side. So all of these, each of these ducts actually empties the lymph into the venous circulation into internal jugular and subclavial veins on the own side of the body. So both of these, the thoracic duct and then the right subclavian duct. So this is the jugular veins, right? This is the internal jugular, right side, internal jugular left side. These are the subclavian right side, subclavian left side veins. So both of these are connected to the veins, and then both of the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct, they both of them drain into these veins, and then via veins they're connected to the heart. So this is the whole system, right? So this is our cisterna chili, thoracic duct opening on the left side, and this is the right side, and these are all the trunks, and then vessels, capillaries we cannot see that, that's a microscopic structure. Now therefore, what is lymph system? Lymph system itself is a low pressure system, like the transport system is like venous system, right? Lymph is propelled with this very similar mechanism like veins use. For example, movement of the skeletal muscle or the milking action of the skeletal muscle. Pressure, when we breathe, pressure changes during thorax cavity, that moves limbs. There are valves that prevents backflow. There are pulsation. If a artery is close by, then that actually creates pulse, and that keeps the lymph going, because if they're closely associated, like especially if they're in touch with each other. Contraction of smooth muscles in the walls of lymphatic itself. So internally they are made up of endothelial cells, and that is smooth muscles. And physical activity also increases. Our physical activity increases the lymph flow. Some homeostatic imbalance in this regard, for example, lymphangitis, which is a condition of the lymph vessel, appear as painful and red under the skin, caused by the inflammation of larger lymphatic vessels that contains vasovasora. What is vasovasora now? The vasovassorum or the vasovasora are small blood vessels that comprise a vascular network supplying to the large blood vessels, like elastic arteries like the aorta or the vena cava. So basically, when lots of a cluster of arteries or veins, when they're like connecting to these bigger vessels, aorta or the vena cava, those clusters together, we will call that as a vasovascera. So when there is some form of congested blood, because it's a cluster of arteries or veins, blood vessels, so it's possible that there is a congestion of blood in those blood vessels, and that will actually also put pressure on the lymphatic system, the lymphatic vessels. Larger lymphatics like blood vessels receives nutrients from the branching of the vasovascerum as well. So any congestion in these smaller vessels actually, because they are the one who are connected to to the lymphatic system might cause like an inflammation in the lymph system. In that case, we will call that as lymphangitis. Lymphedema, which is localized edema, localized swelling caused by anything that prevents the normal return of lymph to blood. Examples: tumors blocking the lymphatics or removal of lymphatics during surgery, especially cancer surgery. Because cancer cells take a pathway of lymphatic sometimes to travel across, so that's why sometimes and they actually house within the lymph nodes. So if these lymph nodes are removed, then that actually sometimes can cause sometime localized edema. Okay. Okay. Questions for you. Lymphatic capillaries owe their permeability to what are these options like among these? So permeability means the way they are, like how easily they are flowing the fluid, and they don't have an open end, it's closed end, so A is not the option. Tight junctions between cells, that is not true. Tight junctions will actually make it impermeable if they have tight junctions between the cells, because tight junctions don't have any gap, so A and C is not an option. Proteins in the lymph fluid have nothing to do with permeability, so basically the mini valve which actually helps the flow to go through, or the lymph to go through. Which of the following now represents a logical sequence of structures that contribute the return of the fluid to the blood via lymphatic system? So the right answer will be C. Why, I will tell you. So from arteries, blood will drain into blood capillaries, especially from the smaller arteries, and the blood capillaries, it will get into the lymphatic vessels, and then within lymphatic vessels it will go through all of the system, like the smaller vessel through the capillaries, then the smaller vessels, then the trunk to the duct, and the ducts finally will open up into the subclavian vein. So therefore this is the right pathway. Right. The third one, which of the following contributes to the flow of lymph to the lymphatic vessels? This one we have discussed, so you can work it on yourself. Now, what kind of lymphatic cells we have? We have lymphocytes. These are actually cells of the adaptive immune system and mature into two main types, T cells and B cells. Okay, and lymphatic cells consist of immune system cells, all immune system cells, and mainly basically these two, T and B cells. Now, what are T and B cells do? What do they do? T and B cells protect against antigens, right? Against, like, antigen is something that is perceived as a foreign substance in our body. For example, a bacteria, virus, toxin, cancer cell, mismatched RBC, these are all antigens. So T and B cells actually protect us against these antigens, and they work very specifically. Okay. Like for example, T cell, they manage immune response and also attack and destroy infected cell, but their function is very specific. B cells produce plasma cells, and which actually secretes antibodies. So these antibodies directly attack these antigens, okay, by phagocytosis. So they have their specific function, and they are also housed, these kind of cells are housed a lot in the lymphatics and the lymphatic vessels within the lymph itself. They are part of T cells, B cells, they are also part of the blood. They are seen in the blood, but because you know them as the blood cells, but they are also part of the lymphatic system. Other than these two, lymph also has macrophages which phagocytosize foreign substances and help activate T cells. There are dendritic cells that capture antigens and deliver them to lymph nodes. Then there are supporting lymph cells called as reticular cells that produce a reticular fiber called stroma. So this kind of this is a network-like structure that works for immune system / the lymphatic system. So these reticular cells produce these fiber-like structures actually. What about the lymphoid organs? Primarily, firstly, the primary lymphoid organ where T and B cells really mature is the red bone marrow in our bones, and then the thymus. These are the two primary organs. Okay. What happens here? B cells only mature in bone marrow. B for bone marrow, so B cells mature here. But T cells originate in bone marrow. Both T cell, B cell originate in bone marrow, but only B cells mature here. B for bone marrow again. So they both originate in the bone marrow, but only B cells mature here, B for bone marrow, but T cells mature in thymus, T for thymus, they mature in the thymus. So that's the two primary organs, right? They are maturing the lymphoid cells, and then they're originating. The secondary lymphoid organs, what are that? Is basically the areas when the lymphocytes, so firstly when they're originating on there, when maturing, not necessarily they are ready to fight an infection, okay? So they have to encounter an antigen in order to get activated, and when they, where they encounter these antigens, that happens in these lymphoid organs. For example, the lymph nodes, the spleen, the malt is a mucus associated lymphoid tissue, and there are some diffused lymphoid tissues also, tissues that are like and diffused around our body systems, okay? So that's called as diffuse lymphoid tissues. So all of these areas actually can have some form of antigen, especially lymph node can have a lot of antigens, like it's a storehouse of certain things, storehouse like for cancer cells and pathogenic cells, it can store. And then when T cell, B cell go there, they interact with these pathogens or these antigens, then they become activated because they create a defense system against them when they are exposed to these foreign substances in the secondary lymphoid organs. Then we have, so these are the lymphoid organs. Then lymphoid tissues. What are these lymphoid tissues? They're basically nothing but reticular connective tissue, which is a type of loose connective tissue. Okay, macrophages actually live on these fibers. Okay, we just now discussed about this reticular tissue made up of reticular cells. What do? They house and provide the proliferation site of the lymphocyte. Okay, so help the lymphocyte to proliferate, offer surveillance vantage points for lymphocytes and macrophages as they filter through lymph. But main function is basically proliferation of lymphocytes. Now, what are the types? Firstly, the diffused lymphoid tissue. Diffused, these are like loose lymphoid cells that are diffused all across our body. Okay, found virtually everywhere, especially in the inner mucous membrane. Lymphoid follicles, which are the nodules, these are much more solid substances. For example, these are the nodes. Okay, these are the different nodes. But the lymphoid diffuse tissue can be located anywhere, but these are the specialized nodes, like they are, you can even see them visually. So therefore much more solid they are. Solid and spherical bodies which have a consistently tightly packed with lymphoid cells and reticular fibers. They are the germinal centers of proliferating B cells, may form a large part of lymphoid organs as well. They are also isolated aggregation of Peyer's patch. There is a isolated aggregation of Peyer's patch in appendix, which is nothing but it's a groupings of lymphoid follicles or nodes in the intestine. Okay, we will again repeat this particular Peyer's patch later on. But lymphoid follicles and nodules are seen in basically in the intestine, and that is called Peyer's patch in the intestine. Okay, Peyer's patch we see in the intestine. It's a collection, nothing but it is a collection of these lymphoid follicles or the nodules, and they're also seen in appendix some. Now lymph nodes, what are these? These are, we will talk about the general location, structure and function. So nothing but this is the principal lymphoid organ of the body, right? So principal secondary lymphoid organ of the body. We have hundreds of nodes throughout our body. They are embedded within the connective tissue, and along basically as the lymphoid vessels are embedded with lymph nodes, as you can see in this whole picture. Now they are kind of named by their body location. For example, whichever one is located in your arm area, we will call that as axillary nodes. Whichever ones are located in the cervical area in your head, we will call that as cervical. If it's a lower part of the body, we will call that as inguinal nodes. These are the main three divisions though. What do? They cleanse the lymph, act as lymph filters. Macrophages, like I said, so they have these lot of pathogens like house there. So macrophages remove and destroy these microorganisms. The T cells, B cell, the immune system actually gets activated here, which is the T cells and B cells. Oftentimes, when they're exposed to these antigens, which are housed in here, like the pathogens or the cancerous cells, these lymphocytes, T cell or B cell, try to attack them within the lymph node. That's how basically they help in this activation. And unless this T cell, B cell is actually interacting with this foreign substance, they're not activated. So in turn, lymph node is activating this T cell, B cells. What's the structure? They vary in shape. They like mostly bean shaped, less than an inch. Each of the nodes. One node is actually around an inch. They have externally surrounded by a fibrous capsule. The capsule fibers kind of sometimes goes inward as trabeculae. You've probably seen this in lab. And there are two histologic like regions of the nodes. One is cortex, one is medulla. Cortex and medulla. Cortex is obviously outside, and medulla is basically inside. All right, so this is how it will look like. So this is the cortex area, the superficial area, and inside we have the medulla area. All right, we will stop here right now, and then we'll pick up from lymph node again, and then we'll finish rest of the lecture in our second part. All right, see you then.